Hi everyone, my name is Stephen Hope. I work for a ISV in the UK where we specialize in writing ISA server add-ons. Now some of you that may sound interesting if you want to extend what ISA can do out the box. But in a previous life, I used to work for Microsoft in the UK where ISA server and Microsoft security overall was one of the specialties that I ended up doing. So I've been asked here to come to talk to you today about some of the myths and mysteries and weirdities that you may and may not come across out in the real world of how ISA server can be used, is used, and maybe should be used. So some food for thought. So because I don't work for Microsoft anymore, I can probably tell you some things that maybe you should or should not know, because I can't get fired. Okay, but they may not ask me back here for next year, so let's try and keep it all nice. All right, so the one slide I have to show you, it's more of a mystery than a myth. Okay, Forefront is the umbrella for Microsoft security. Okay, this is where all the new stuff you're seeing with the antivirus, anti-spyware, all the edge perimeter stuff like with the Whale acquisition, ISA server, all these things are coming under. So when I get the question, what is Forefront? That's kind of many things. So if you're not familiar with exactly what Forefront is and how the branding all works, come to the Ask the Experts booths and find out. Are we all pretty familiar with this? Can we move on from this? Good. Okay, start off, what's a myth? Anybody know any good ones? No one knows a myth. Come on. Anyway, the world is flat. How long did that one last? Loch Ness Monster? Weapons of mass destruction. Well, hey. Okay, this is kind of where it's come from. A story, something out of early history, some more recent than others. Okay, it's not necessarily based in fact. How do you dispel a myth? Generally with the truth. Now, some truths are easier to swallow than others. Some of you may think things we're going to discuss here is closer to heresy. I would never do that in my network. No one got fired for spending too much money on security. Okay, some common ISA server myths. You may have come across some of these. Maybe you think some of these are true. Let's see at the end how many you think are true. So, some common myths. ISA server is just proxy 3. Come on, you've got to have heard that one before, right? Okay, no yeses this time, right? Okay, it's made by Microsoft. How can that be secure? Okay. Just groan and sort of cheer at points, so go for it. Okay, ISA is full of security holes. This one I hear a lot. The truth may scare you. Okay, ISA is not certified from environment. Comes up every now and then. And no way, just give me a real firewall, whatever that means. And the hardware one. Okay, ISA should be put in the DMZ. That one will be interesting. Complexity is security. Identification is authentication. This is stuff that you may read on a slide and think, well, that looks silly. But when you look at your own network designs, how many times is that actually used as a fundamental part of the design? You'd be surprised. Okay, ISA should never be joined to the domain. Let's have a look at that one too. Load balancing. Anyone tried load balancing ISA server? Okay, a few. Did it work? Okay, one, yep, that's a good start. Okay, there's a lot of myth and mystery around that one. Okay, in Windows VPNs, and using ISA as a VPN concentrator. Okay, this is an area that I'm going to focus on a bit at the end. It happens to be one of the add-ons that we supply for ISA server. Funny that. Okay, can proxy 3 do all of this? Okay, very simple diagram, but it kind of shows end-to-end what you can do with an ISA server. So, for example, it's an application layer firewall. Believe it or not, yes, it's a firewall. Okay, it'll do a layer 7 firewall. That's application filtering all the way down to routing packets between 2 network cables. Okay. VPN concentrator, yes, shock horror, ISA is a VPN concentrator. So for those of you who are using ISA server and didn't notice this and just spent a lot of money buying some other appliance because it's a hardware device, You've probably just spent money on something that you already had and didn't know about. Okay, it's also got intrusion detection and flood mitigation. Pretty cool, considering it's only a proxy server. Authentication transition? Where are we going with this? Okay, authentication. Third-party plugins, I like this one. Wonder why. Okay, SDK. Go and add your own stuff on. Script things for it. Go nuts. Oh, and by the way, it also acts as a proxy server and cache, which may come in handy. A little bit more than just a proxy server. Okay, this is now where we have to talk for hours on end about trustworthy computing and how real good Microsoft is at security and all this stuff. So I'll just put a note slide in to say, well, yeah, well, that's all you're going to get from me on that. We're going to get into some real good stuff, not the marketing slides. Okay, a quick note. Hands up for those who've heard of the OSI model. Okay, how many layers are there? 7, some say 8. Any more on 8? Okay, the official one, ironically about the ISO, has 7. Okay, you've probably heard of layer 8, which is the user. Okay, the most difficult one to secure. Which layer does security play a part in? All of them. There's the one layer that people don't really talk about much, which I kind of think is the extra layer, the 9th layer, layer 0. The design. What is your design looking like? This is before you get physical with cabling and stuff. What does the Visio look like? If that is wrong, everything else you build on top of it is kind of flawed at the beginning. So get layer 0 right. Okay, so again, this is where some of the heresy will come in, dispelling some of these myths, because you think, I'm not going to do that, I might get fired. Okay, security record this far. This is where we do a bit of bingo on vulnerabilities. Okay, this is not to say that someone's better than someone else. You can go and check these numbers. It's going to come up on those URLs, which you can download the slides, etc. Go look for yourself. They may have changed by the time you look at them. The point is here to dispel a myth, common perception. Okay, any guesses on the first one? Give me a number. How many vulnerabilities exist in Checkpoint NG since that version's been around? 12? Close. 9. Next one? 22. Someone likes Cisco, don't they? Well, there's 12, so right answer, wrong question. Blue coat? Not so many, but is it a firewall? That's just in a proxy engine that's getting to security vulnerabilities already. Okay? Juniper? Also 2. ISA? How many? ISA 2006, the recent one. Any guesses? 0? Anything more than 0? 0. ISA 2004. Bearing in mind this is now on Service Pack 2, has been out for quite a few years now. Any numbers? 0. Okay. Not to say that ISA is flawless. Yes, it has had service packs to fix issues, generally functionality things, nothing that has allowed anyone to hack through or take over or do anything bad to the firewall. This is not Microsoft numbers. These aren't even Microsoft marketing numbers. This is independent stuff. Go check out the website. Okay, so can we put this myth to bed? Just because it's running on Windows and it's got a Microsoft sticker on the box does not mean it was written by the same people who put little Easter eggs into XL97. Okay. How's the other guy doing? This is an interesting one. Okay, this is again from the same website, sample of what Checkpoint is. The numbers that interested me there were that 100% of the vulnerabilities are accessible from remote. And a lot of them gave you system access. But we thought they were hardware boxes, aren't they? Flawless, right? Because it doesn't have HP or Dell written on it, doesn't have Windows on it, must be secure. Okay, another common one, ISO certifications. People want the piece of paper. So what has ISO got? ICSA Labs Firewall Certified, okay, pretty good one, not too bad. About Common Criteria Certified. Okay, I6006 has just been approved for certification. Now, this is all lost in the wordings of these things. Okay, it doesn't mean it has the certification right now. It means it's approved for the evaluation of, which even in a lot of government environments, that is good enough for deployment. Because generally, if it gets to the stage, it will get approved as a general rule of thumb. But just to show how the history of it's gone, I6004 has Common Criteria EAL4 Plus certification. That's the highest you're going to get for an off-the-shelf piece of software. Okay, so when you're spending all your money on these other devices that do maybe a subset of the ISO functionality, has it been certified for 007's use? Even ISO 2000, remember that thing? That kind of was Proxy 3-ish. Even got Common Criteria EAL2. Not super high, but considering it was built in 1999, isn't so bad, really. Again, check out the Microsoft website. Common Criteria gives you a lot more information about what goes on in those tests. So there's the piece of paper. Read it and weep for those that don't believe it. It exists. Okay, that's the ISO 2004 piece of paper showing EAL4 Plus. Now, this is always a fun one. The hardware firewall. I hear this all the time. What is a hardware firewall? What is a real firewall? We'll get onto that in a sec. But hardware firewalls, they all have an element of memory, processing power, and some form of storage. Even this little one you see here, the chips are all numbered. Just because they don't look like a DIMM module doesn't mean it's not a piece of RAM. Just because it doesn't have Intel or AMD written on it doesn't mean it's not a CPU. They all have the basic components of doing this stuff. Okay. Hardware solutions have ROMs and firmware updates. Who's ever upgraded the firmware on their ADSL router at home? Isn't that a hardware device? Hardware vendors have download and update pages on their website. So if you can download something, you're not downloading a piece of hardware, right? You're downloading a piece of software. So hardware solutions run software too. So this whole mystery around, well, it's a piece of hardware, it must be secure, it's bulletproof. They're running software. It's got to the point that most of the appliances and 1U units you will see in the market today actually are x86 architecture pieces of hardware. It's just a server in a cool little flashy blue box with some different logos on it, but it has a motherboard, they have RAM, CPU, sometimes Intel or AMD. They have an operating system, could be a Unix-based thing, Linux, some even run Windows. But because you can't see the UI and you don't plug a mouse into it, suddenly it's perceived as more secure. Oh, and by the way, that's why they charge you 10 times the amount of money you should be paying for that piece of hardware. So think about what you are buying and putting in. Don't just get suckered in by all the sales spiel around it and thinking I'm buying a hardware device. Don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with buying appliances. Appliances are great. They're fit for purpose sometimes. You want something that you can just rack, switch on, get it running in 10, 15 minutes. It's already pre-configured. Saves you days of messing around researching how to do stuff. That adds value. Does it mean that a software device is more or less secure than a hardware device? No. Depends how you've configured it. So what is a real firewall? Can someone please tell me? Wasn't a rhetorical question, by the way. What is a real firewall? I keep being told this all the time. No, I want to put something real in there. Okay, is it a religious or political point of view? Because half the time it seems to be. People have their allegiance to one particular thing. Don't really know why, just because that's what they've always used. For me, a real firewall should be something that can protect against real threats. So if you think something was real in what you use today, when did you last take an assessment of, is it still real Does it protect against real threats of today? Okay, is an ASIC-based firewall real? Okay, typically those are what's seen as hardware devices, but there is still an element of software logic in there. Often very limited of what they can do, and they do a good job of doing specific things. In particular, layer 4. Because processing IP packet headers is a really straightforward process. So it's very easy to do that in silicon. So if you're not worried about layer 7 threats, ASIC devices can be really good. And in certain areas of your network, you may not be worried about layer 7 threats, which is a perfectly legitimate point of view. But it doesn't mean it's valid everywhere. So on the same basis, is ISA server a real firewall? Well, if you're worried about layer 7 threats, then yes, it is. Hands up, who uses ISA server as a firewall today? A lot of you. That's a good start. So why aren't you telling everyone else to do that if you're getting the value out of it? Is that more of an internal firewall or a perimeter firewall? Hands up for perimeter, internet facing. Okay, less hands. Internal firewall? Interesting, even less hands. So some of you are even seeing the value of it today. Good. Okay, so generally not a good topic to discuss at the dinner table, especially if everyone else understands IT, because everyone has their point of view. Okay. Complexity equals security. Doesn't that look secure? It must be. Looks complicated enough. How do you know? If it's that complicated and you don't know what's going on, you've got something to worry about. Okay, a number of times I've seen networks where you've got the best of breed vendors dotted all over the place, each doing their specific role really well, and Ethernet cables flying everywhere. And you ask the question that scares the admin. What happened on Sunday at 6:45 when X went wrong? Now, they've got to go through all these best-of-breed vendors, looking through their logs in their own proprietary formats half the time, trying to collate all this data to figure out, how did this happen? And a week later, you get your answer. Right, you need to know what's going on, and if that goes down to operations as well, if you can't operate the system to know what all the components are doing together, you have a problem. And at what cost? Just because you spent 10 times more than you should have done does not mean you are 10 times more secure. Funny, the hacker dude doesn't care how much you spent. And sometimes the complexity for the bad guy is a great thing, because there's more devices, there's more things they can leverage, and the longer it takes for you to know that you've been hacked. Okay, this is pretty key. Most security breaches are due to misconfiguration. Now, for those of you who have environments, if you've got lots of best-of-breed vendors in that particular area, can you honestly say that you have an expert who knows how to configure and manage all those different vendors' products? Or do you have the normal HR scenario where you've got the lowest paid guy out of university you could find who can kind of click the right buttons on all of the products put together? Because I know which one I see more often than not, and it's scary. And if the problems come down to configuration, not the fault of a vendor having a security hole, you've got a problem here as well. This is back to layer 8 is not just the user. It is any kind of human, especially one operating system. A number of times I've seen companies with a firewall rule down at like number 38, which is like the get out of jail rule, or the just make it work rule, or even better, the temp rule. You know, the one you put in when you're troubleshooting something, and then something started working once that was put in, and then management wouldn't let you take it out because the system needs to run. 6 months later, it's still there. Scary. This stuff happens. Okay, here's the truth. Complexity is job security. All right, because if the company thinks you're the only one who has a vague idea what's going on, what's the odds of them getting rid of you? Keep it simple. And by the way, third-party consulting houses keep this approach as well, because they want their retainers being renewed every year. What's going on there? Pretty good idea of what some networks look like. Hey, would you fire the guy that set that up and expect someone else to pick up the job? Would anyone accept the job? Okay, perimeter design. This comes up a lot. This is back to, should I put ISA in my DMZ? If that's the politically correct term these days. Okay, think real world. Put your strongest security closest to the asset you want to protect. That makes sense. Where does Britney Spears' bodyguard hang out? Probably at the hairdressers these days, but normally it'd be closer to where the person is you're trying to protect. The same thing goes here for the Mona Lisa in the picture. Okay, you don't send the police force off on vacation, spreading them out on the perimeter far away when someone like the president's coming to town. Doesn't make sense. So where should you be doing your layer 7 or tighter inspection, your authentication, your decryption, the deep inspection? Out on the perimeter near the internet, or closer to the internal network where the assets are? Because in my mind, it should be closer to the internal network where the assets are. A number of times I see something like ISA server being used on the perimeter only, and then some layer 4 device on the inside. It's scary, but it happens. Remember, keep it simple. Now, back on the OSI model. Take a picture of the HR flowchart of your company and place it on the OSI model. And just think about where that sits. And then think, well, where is the security team? Otherwise generally known as what? The network security team. Okay, and where does the networking stuff tend to fit? Layer 7, layer 1? Top half, bottom half? Any guesses? 3, 4? There's various fingers going up. We can use voices too, guys. Okay, the networking stuff tends to be your guys with the Cisco certifications who like plugging in cables and managing stuff through serial ports and all that good stuff. Now, that all has great value, but they tend not to do stuff with servers that have mice and things plugged into them. It's not kind of their area. Yet somehow that seems to be that they are the network security guys. And now the guys who deal with the applications, that's the server team. Put them on the OSI model. They're up at layer 7, coming down a little bit. Hands up for the guys in the network team in the room. We have a few. And the server team? Well, a lot more. Funny that, yeah. That's why you're at the Microsoft conference. Normally the other guys are at the Cisco ones. But you get the idea. Do you have the phone number of the guy in the network team? Do you even talk to them? Do you even know where they are, or who they are, or what their name is? Okay, let's be honest here. Most of the time, they're the enemy. They're the guy that won't let your stuff work. Okay. So what often happens is you get these great security designs done in Visio, and they look all fantastic and secure, and everyone signs off on it, spends a lot of money, and goes home. And it's a big, complicated layer 4 routing nightmare. And somehow this is believed because it costs a lot of money and the routing is so complex, no one will figure out how to get through it. Okay. One of the key things I see over and over again, that systems end up being far simpler, easier to manage, and more secure is when you map the logical and physical topology on top of each other. What I mean by that is when you've got a whole bunch of layer 4 firewalls and devices routing between DMZs and all these different areas of the network, and then you place application-style servers like SMTP relays, proxy servers, or ISA server in some cases, and you start forcing traffic through a particular route at layer 7, but it doesn't have to follow the layer 4 path. Think about it. When you put your Exchange front-end server in a DMZ, horror, or an ISA server in a DMZ, and the traffic's going in and out of ISA server through the same layer 4 firewall. Physically, do you have to go through ISA server to get from the internet to the internal network? No, you wouldn't. If you had a way of exploiting one of those vulnerabilities that do exist in other vendors' products as well, you wouldn't have to have gone through layer 7 of ISA. You could have just gone straight through to the internal network because the Ethernet cable physically lets you do it. But there's a perception because the network security guy said this is fine, and because it's a piece of hardware, that can never happen. Okay, if their security device is so good, why cannot it understand the applications that you are using? Why is it not a layer 7 security device? Think about where the security layer is drawn on your network diagrams. Is it where the firewalls are? Or is it where the application logic lies? Do you draw a security perimeter where your SMTP server is on your network diagram? That's where you're securing your email. What about your reverse proxy for publishing OWA, whatever product that may be? Is that drawn as a security perimeter? Or is that just some server sat in a DMZ between two other security perimeters? Back to what goes into a real DMZ, or DMZ, if you're from the other part of the world. What's in that picture behind the fence? Absolutely nothing. Quick one. Real world. How long are you expected to survive if you got shoved into the little area of land between North and South Korea? Are you expected to get to the other side? No. You are as good as dead. You are expendable. Things put in that area are expected to die, which is how the philosophy of the whole DMZ came about in the first place. The anonymous web server that you didn't want on your internal network. But then when you go and start opening holes in the back-end firewall, allowing those servers to talk to your Active Directory and your SQL databases and all those types of things, guess what? The security layer of the second firewall cannot help you. You've explicitly given the bad guy permission to go over it. And if you're encrypting stuff on the way in, like SSL, for example, your perimeter firewall will not help you. So what is the device that's actually doing the layer of security? It's that proxy device inside the DMZ. So that really should be where the line is drawn. In which case, what's drawn on your diagram right now as your perimeter is actually just a form of routing. Heresy. Their expensive device that's an appliance, that's a piece of hardware, is now a router. Well, if it's getting encrypted traffic in one end and on the other way out, it allows everything through, it's not really doing much else, is it? Identification is authentication. Who would agree with this? Of course, you're all going to say no now. Okay, what's identification? It's basically a T-shirt with your name on it. I said I'm Stephen. How do you know? I could be anybody. It's like an IP address on a T-shirt. What's your IP address? He could just tell me anything. Maybe he's right. Maybe he's not. But when you're building a firewall rule on your security boundary, what do we use as the most common form of allowing or denying access? An IP address. Something that is not authenticated, something that can be spoofed, something that should not be trusted. You're allowing and denying access based on something that says who it thinks it is or who you think it is. But you haven't actually verified it. That is the process of authentication. Prove it. How do you prove who an IP address is? Okay, where is the IP address on the OSI model? Does authentication happen down there? Nope. You can use things like IPsec, etc., with AH to do these types of things, but is that used on the internet? Nope. So think about it. You're relying on a security perimeter that relies on identification as a means of access. Not so good. And for those who may have spotted already, yep, this is a fake piece of authentication. That happens too. Bad guys can also get credentials, potentially. That's why we have other ways of securing those credentials, two-factor authentication, etc. Okay, don't let the terminology bamboozle you. Think about putting stuff that happens in IT in the real world and think, if this was happening for real, what would I do? Because very often you may find all of a sudden that, yeah, I'd be nuts to do that. And when the guy turns up at your door wanting to come into your house to do something in your house, check the gas meter, whatever it may be, don't you want to know who he is before you let him in? Or you just believe that because he's wearing a bright orange t-shirt that he must be good? Some of you may do that in the real world. Maybe you won't now. Okay, just a quick thought. Shouldn't a PIN actually be a PAN? PIN numbers, personal identification numbers. But I'm number 3479. No, that's not my real PIN. Okay, think about it. It's just the way terminology's gone about. It doesn't actually identify you. It's something that's in your head. So think about what's actually happening, not just what the words say. Marketing stuff can be scary, what they say you can do. To domain or not to domain? Really, why should there be a question? Okay, we just talked about the concept of authentication and why it's so important. When someone provides authentication, you can authorize that. You can double check it. If you're relying on identification, you can't prove that. Now, if a Windows machine is in a work group, what authentication context does it have with another machine in a work group? Any guesses? Yep, it has a local SAM accounts database, and the other machine has also a local SAM accounts database. Does one trust the other at all? No. One machine sends packets to another. Do you have any way of verifying it definitely came from that other machine? No. Unless you establish some other form of trust authority, using something with certificates or some other base. But if you're doing that, you might as well have just joined them to a domain. Joining machines to a domain gives you a security context to work within. Because when the machine's in the domain, there's something that can be trusted. The machine account can be authenticated. Okay, so domain machines are far more secure than a workgroup machine. Plus, you can manage it. You can use group policy on it to lock it down. And if someone hacks the box, well, group policy can reinforce settings again. It can let you know something has happened. Okay, machines in workgroups are dangerous. And of course, what's the local admin password on all your workgroup servers in your DMZ? More often than not, they are the same. Because that's the server image that got installed, right? Did you change them? Maybe, maybe not. If you did, they're probably all the same still, just so that they're not the same as the server build. Or you've got some Excel spreadsheet with them all in. That's handy. But don't forget, the bad guys also love pass-through authentication. So you take out one box, you can probably just map a drive to the next one, because the password's going to be the same for the administrator account. Think about it. And how do you manage those local passwords in the local accounts database? Well, if they're in a work group, it's a lot harder to do. If it's in a domain, it doesn't matter so much, because you've got Active Directory to help you manage these things. And accounts that have permissions, you can make them domain accounts. So you can use the same account on multiple machines. And if you change the password, it's done once in one place. You can track accountability. There's a lot more things you can do when you're in a domain. So please, please, please stop putting ISA servers in workgroups. There is no security benefit of doing this. It does not put your Active Directory at a greater risk. Now think about it. If you're cabling up with Ethernet your ISA server to your internal network, believing in a work group, and doing some fancy connectivity with Radius or some LDAP lookups, you still have physical Ethernet access to the domain controller because it's on that network. So if by some miracle someone finds out how to own an ISA server, after all, it's running Windows, it's bound to happen, right? They still then have physical access to the LAN if you carry on playing out that attack notion. Therefore, they could still potentially have physical access to launch an attack onto a domain controller. Just because the machine is a member of the domain doesn't mean that they have any more rights to do anything on it. Just because they take over a local box does not mean they automatically have domain admin rights. Okay, there's a big myth here. I still keep hearing occasionally that people think that domains within a single forest have security boundaries. They don't. The forest is a security boundary. So don't start putting the Active Directory domains in your DMZ when they're part of the same forest. You just extended your security perimeter in the other side of your firewall. Okay, does this mean that every single machine in your DMZ should be part of your internal Active Directory? Well, not necessarily if it doesn't need to be. If they never need to authenticate with anything on the inside, then have a DMZ Active Directory forest, which is there to manage and operate your DMZ servers if you still want to have a DMZ and put things in there. It's better than not doing it. Okay. In ISA server terms, if you put ISA Server Enterprise Edition in a workgroup, you lose functionality. There are some basic things with ISA Server cannot do if it's in a workgroup. And you do not get a rebate on your license fee for not using them. You're paying for this whether you use it or not. Okay, no high availability on the CSS. This one is pretty key. You can go and put all your ISA servers in a workgroup, make a nice big array out of it after spending weeks figuring out how to do the certificate implementation so they trust each other. And then you suddenly realize, what if my CSS goes down? Without a CSS, you cannot change the configuration of the ISA server. So you install the second one. And all of a sudden you realize there's actually no way you can replicate that information across, because Adam, which is where the ISA configuration is stored, will not replicate unless it's in an Active Directory domain. So you're stuck with one CSS, single point of failure. Probably not the best idea. No Kerberos constrained delegation. Now this may be something that you've heard of. Who's heard of Kerberos constrained delegation? A few of you. Anyone using it? Cool, so you figured out which boxes to tick in your AD users and computers. This stuff is really, really powerful technology. This is basically allowing ISA server to log users onto internal servers on their behalf without having their Active Directory credentials. To do this, the Active Directory and the servers that it will be accessing by ISA have to trust the ISA server. It cannot do that if it's in a work group. There is no common security context between the server you are giving access to and the ISA server if they are not in a domain. So you can still use certain kinds of delegation in a work group. You can use basic authentication. You can use Radius. You can use various other methods, but you're missing out on the key one. What is the biggest blocker you're going to have if you don't have Kerberos constrained delegation and you're publishing Exchange? Any guesses? What can you not do without Kerberos constrained delegation? Try put a certificate on your Windows mobile device and get it to synchronize. To do certificate authentication into ISA server works great, but then ISA needs to tell the Exchange server who the user is. Now, if the ISA was only given a certificate, it cannot replay credentials to the Exchange server. Therefore, it cannot get your mailbox unless you use Kerberos constrained delegation. So for those of you with ISA servers in a work group publishing OWA, and you're thinking about deploying Windows Mobile, get those ISA servers in the domain. Deploy Windows Mobile with client certificates on them. And you don't have to worry about every time the user changes their password every 30 days, they've got to retype their password into their phone. They won't need to do it. Okay, this is really useful stuff. but you need to have it in a domain for it to work. Okay, read this. You've all jotted it down by now, except for those nice short URLs. Okay, this is an article on isoserver.org. Again, one I'm sure you are all very familiar with that website, all right? Okay, one of you, great. Okay, this is where Tom Shinder talks a lot about domain and membership. He goes into far more excruciatingly detail about what works, what doesn't work, and why you should be doing this. Now, the only area I would say you wouldn't need to go in a domain is if your ISO server was at the internet perimeter and you were only allowing anonymous traffic through it. There is a case where you may decide you do not need to be in a domain. But again, if you want that edge perimeter in a larger network to be highly available, you probably need it just so your CSSs are in domain, in which case make use of the forest in a DMZ. So again, look at your requirements. There are some exceptions, but the general rule of thumb should be ISO server should be a member of the domain. Everyone get that now? Any questions on that? Pretty important one, this. Okay, to make this happen though, ISO needs connectivity to the domain controllers. Pretty important. So if you're putting a layer 4 firewall device because it's got that shiny blue box that you spend a lot of money on, you know, the one where it makes all its decisions based on IP addresses or identification, and you've got to now allow traffic from the ISO server through that device to the Active Directory, that becomes painful because you do that thing that the network security guys hate. You open up a lot of ports. Okay, the ports issue is not the problem. The problem is that your security device, being the layer 4 firewall, does not understand how to operate protocols like RPC because it's not protocol aware. So then you get into the argument with everyone about how to do reg hacks to make RPC work on fixed ports. Okay, you're solving the wrong problem. The problem is not a question of ports. The question is, why is the ISO server not plugged into the internal network? Why are you putting ISO server through the pain of going through another device which inherently does far less than ISO does anyway? Think about which device is giving you your security. And don't just think it looks good because the Visio diagram says so. Okay, ISO load balancing. Again, there's a lot of myth around this one. What does ISO use for load balancing out of the box? Had a hand? No? Any guesses? What does ISO use? NLB in Windows. But there's a difference. Okay, it's a quick wizard to turn on. You don't have to go configuring network card settings all over the place. In an array of, say, 5 servers, you don't have to go and do it on every single box and try and keep it correct across the board. You do it once. You add a machine to the array. It picks up the settings and just starts working. Okay. But a big difference in your infrastructure, you need to communicate with the network guy, is that it uses unicast by default, not multicast. Windows by default would use a multicast NLB, which scares people. You start having to do ARP table entries and routers, and your network guys just, no, I'm not doing that. Okay, not the case with ISO server. By default, it uses unicast, which is a lot easier to configure. Yes, you could still have problems with broadcast storms, but they are relatively easy to solve. Okay, use a VLAN or a hub. Most of the time, they spend a fortune on their fancy Cisco switches or whatever you've got that can do this anyway. Okay, contain broadcast storms with a switch or buy a hub. It works. You don't have to go and spend a lot of money on other devices, like external load balancing devices. They are there. You can go and buy them. Each one will cost more than the ISO server does. A number of times I've seen projects of ISO server being implemented with external hardware load balancers, and 85% of the time of the project is spent trying to get the load balancers to work with ISO server. It's scary. Half the problem is, how do the load balancers actually know what ISO server is doing so it knows how to distribute the load? It sends pings to it. Are you alive? What does a firewall do to an incoming ping from the outside? Drops it. Okay. What would the firewall generally do when it gets half-open TCP sessions? Probably not what the load balancer is expecting it to do. You see the problems here. There are some systems that can work really well, but you need to configure them specifically to work in an environment where ISA server exists. Other problems you may come across as well is tracking source IP addresses, because ISA server may end up seeing, depending on your configuration, the source IP address being the load balancer. So now you want to do a query in your ISA logs to see what happened on Thursday night, and you just see the load balancer did a whole bunch of stuff. Not very useful. Okay, again, creating complexity. You probably don't need to do this. Keep it simple. You do this, it's come up a few times, you may have noticed. You do this and your life is easier. You can probably sleep easier. Okay, you run the risk of saving your company some money. Okay, some more myths or facts in some people's mind you may have come across. Do you all agree with this one? Who uses an IPsec VPN in their environment? Okay, quite a few. So you still haven't dumped them all and put SSL in yet? Didn't taken over everything? IPsec VPNs are still around. They're going to be for a while. They have a place in your environment for either site-to-site access or remote client access. Sometimes you want that level of access for a very good reason. Okay, but does that mean you have to go and buy a third-party client that can just do what Windows does out of the box? Because you are told that they're much more secure. Hands up who's ever had problems on client PCs because of a third-party VPN client being installed. There's more of you than use IPsec VPNs. How did that work? But they're more secure and easier, right? Why would you use something in the box when this third-party thing is so much better? That's why. If what's in Windows is rubbish, it means you have to go and buy something else, which means someone can go and sell you theirs. Let's face it. What do most of these clients do? Do they do any kind of endpoint checking? Some, maybe. To what level? Who knows? The vast majority, all they do is have a way of requesting authentication from the user, sending it to the concentrator, authorizing them into the system, and creating a tunnel. Generally using proprietary extensions to IPsec so that it works from a dynamic client IP address, which is why you very often cannot get vendor XYZ's client to work with vendor ABC's VPN concentrator. You have to stick to the same brand because it's maybe using IPsec, but they've made some changes to it that makes it work in their environment. Why do you think they do that? So you keep buying their clients. It's too hard to change clients. Okay, we live in a capitalistic world with this stuff. Let's be realistic about it. At the end of the day, Windows can do this out of the box using a standards-based implementation. Windows standards-based? Who said that? Okay, PPTP. Go to that horrible, evil thing. Yeah, no, it's got an RFC. Well, it's all out there. You can have a look how it works. Built by a whole bunch of people who are generally pretty good at networking. It's not just something Microsoft invented by themselves one day. Okay, 128-bit encryption, which is probably what a lot of your third-party clients are doing. Okay, Cisco helped build the encryption technology as well. L2TP, another tunneling protocol, has an RFC. Okay, built by Microsoft and Cisco originally. And IPsec, well, I mean, there's too many to list there. That'll fill the whole slide. But started off with that one. And again, ISA server will make use of the Windows VPN architecture of 128-bit triple DES. This is all pretty standards-based. Okay, so you've got a good variety of things you can use inside Windows to do that. But the third-party clients you may or may not have will probably not work to connect directly to a Windows box. because you need to have those third-party proprietary extensions on the VPN concentrator. Some concentrators you may have already bought would work with a Windows client. Normally not by default, funnily enough. You have to manually go in and enable things like LTTP access. Or you've been told the horror stories that PPTP is too insecure to use. Yet when they'll tell you to go and turn off and lower the security of IPsec so that it can work through NAT. Well, the main differences you're going to get between PPTP and an L2TP IPsec VPN. The beauty of using L2TP IPsec is you have a certificate on the endpoint. You can verify who that endpoint is. PPTP does not give you that ability. That's a quick, easy way of doing it. But there runs a risk you may end up connecting to someone else's client or someone else's concentrator if they manage to do some sort of IP spoofing or route the traffic somewhere else. Okay. But whoever reads a security warning anyway when the certificates don't match, which is another problem back on layer 8. Okay, VPNs and ISA server makes use of strong authentication techniques. This is not just username and password. Just using a standard ISA server as a concentrator, you can use EAP as an authentication type, which gives you access to smart cards, certificates on the machine itself. Now, MSChamp v2, very, very strong. Username and password only. Two-factor authentication. Use your tokens you have, whether it's a text message sent to your phone or it's something attached to your keyring. Doesn't matter. ISA will work with it. Okay. Something to authorize those credentials. Use Radius. You can attach to any back-end directory system. Doesn't really matter. Okay. Active Directory, pretty common one. If it's most of your users would have an Active Directory account, so use that. If you have another third-party system, they may have their own directory service. Who's got a VPN or remote gateway system that uses its own directory separate from Active Directory? Okay, we've got one person awake at the front here. Think about that, though. You then got to try and keep things in sync between directory services. That's easy, right? Okay, keeping directories in sync can be a nightmare. How many times and places do you want to use it to change a password? Keep layer 8 as easy as possible. Okay, something that gets overlooked a lot in VPN scenarios. What happens when your hardware VPN concentrator decrypts traffic? It just throws it onto the internal network. All it does is decapsulation, and generally that's how they work. With ISA server, it treats VPN connections as yet another network. It's just a virtual one instead of being a piece of Ethernet. So to get traffic to leave an ISA server to go onto your internal network, it has to go through the application layer filters, has to go through the RPC filter, okay, which would have stopped Lambda and the like traveling through VPN tunnels. Okay. It also has to go through rules in the ISA firewall rule base. So just because you've been authenticated and you're connected does not necessarily mean that you can send packets to anything on the internal network. There still has to be an ISA rule allowing you access. Now this is a little subtlety difference. Because it's all in one device, the firewall and the VPN concentrator, the rule doesn't care about your source IP address. It knows who you are. It authenticated you with your user account. So you can create a rule in ISA saying that members of the accounts department can access the accounts servers with specific protocols, if that's all you want to give them access to. You don't have to play around trying to hard code them with specific IP addresses to come from the concentrator, and then on the hardware firewall trying to map those source IP addresses through the internal network. This is stuff people do. It's scary. It's really easy to do with ISA server, and far more secure because you're not relying on identification alone. Okay, traffic can be restricted by groups, protocols, and IP information. You can still do things with IP restrictions if you wanted to. A little bit more secure than your average concentrator, although unfortunately ISA gets overlooked far too much in the VPN space. And don't forget, any other third-party plugins for application filtering would also work on your VPN traffic. So if you plugged in an antivirus engine into ISA server, and someone accessed an intranet portal through a VPN, which happens, that traffic can be virus scanned too at the ISO layer. Site-to-site VPNs, very useful things when you've got remote branch offices. With the price of broadband coming down so much, it's often a lot cheaper just to do a local internet connection through the ISP that happens to be where the office is and set up a VPN connection. You can do this with ISA on both ends. If you do that, you can have a very, very secure VPN between the offices. Not just making use of appreciate key and source and destination IP addresses, which is very scary once again, how many times that comes up. Okay? You can do things with ISA with site-to-site VPNs where it actually requires machine certificates on both ends, so that each end can identify each other. They can then use client certificates on each end so they can authenticate the dial-up connection to each other. Okay, wrap it up in L2TP. Each end has its own set of application filters as well. Pretty powerful stuff. If you have a third-party gateway at the head office or somewhere else, that's also fine. You can create a site-to-site VPN from ISA to most third-party concentrators in a site-to-site mode, because that's operating in proper IPsec mode, not necessarily requiring the third-party customizations they make in their client. Okay, so if you currently have a concentrator in your head office, you want to set up a branch environment, you can put an ISA server down in the branch, which can be a local proxy and cache to help speed up the line, can establish the VPN tunnel to head office, even to your third-party gateway. Okay, maybe even provide local remote access to specific resources if you wanted to. There's a lot of stuff you can do with this one ISA server out the box. Okay, the next thing, ISA with VPN security with quarantine. Who's familiar with VPN quarantine on ISA server? Cool, a few of you. How many of you use it? Yeah, a bit less. Is that easy to set up? I see some shaking heads and sloping shoulders, and I'm guessing probably not as easy as you'd have liked. How many of you got it working? Even less. Okay, this is a great piece of technology. It's a pity it wasn't really finished very well, wasn't it? Okay, ISA has a separate virtual internal network called the VPN quarantine network. By default, this is disabled. All right, the idea of the quarantine network when you switch it on is when a client remotely VPNs in, they get stuck in that network. And they have to declare a state of health to get out of that network to the normal VPN network. Okay, by changing the source network, different sets of firewall rules can apply to the traffic. So when they're stuck in the quarantine zone, you may only give them access to your antivirus update server or your WSUS server, but not to everything else. Once they've proved they're healthy, they can get a second level of access. So it's an extra barrier for being a known user who is good and authenticated and trusting the machine they're dialing in from. Okay. Part of the problem was there is no client provided out of the box from Microsoft to do this. There is a free download you can do on the website, on Microsoft.com, which gives you a bunch of scripts that you can customize for your environment. For some of you, that may be enough. How many of you did that solution using the scripting stuff that was downloaded? Great. Look at the last line of your script file. What does it say? It runs a little utility called rqc.exe and pumps in the shared secret that gets you out of quarantine. So guess what? Someone just types it into the DOS prompt and they're through. They don't have to run your script. Sorry to break the bad news to you. So it's better than nothing, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't stop someone wanting to bypass it if they wanted to. Okay, this is part of what we do at Winfrosoft. We provide you a client for VPN quarantine, which looks like that on the screen. Very simple traffic light system, nothing to bamboozle the user. There's no tools options, IPsec settings. There's nothing to confuse them. It's simple. Okay, things like this client can do for you is that it installs in user mode and runs in user mode. Don't have to be an administrator to get this stuff working either. Okay, very simple client-server architecture. You install the server, server component of it, set up a few settings, build a client setup package, which effectively wraps up a CMAC installation for you. Deploy the 0.5 megabyte XE to your client PCs, however you want to, log on scripts, whatever. It runs in user mode, remember, so it's not a big problem to do. Install the client. That doesn't ask the user questions like, what's your VPN server name? Because how many layer 8s would get that right? It's all pre-packaged inside the installation file. Dial up the connection and run through the security checks. And then if they're healthy, they get through. If not, you can redirect them to a remediation webpage on the intranet or wherever you want it to go to help them get healthy. This gives you a proper security layer for quarantine. And unless this client reports the health status that complies with your policy, you do not get out of quarantine. There is no going and running rqc.exe and guessing the password. Okay, so this takes it from a nice-to-have preference to a proper security solution. Oh, and you can control your client policy through group policy as well, with an Active Directory template. So there's nothing new and difficult to manage in this scenario for you. Oops. Okay, if you're going to build your own scripts, you should at least check for this. 3 key main areas: your antivirus status, the personal firewall, and any missing security updates for the operating system or Office, whatever it may be. Okay, these are 3 key things that our client checks for, amongst other stuff as well. But please at least check for those 3 key ones. All right, some bits and pieces other customers have had to say. This is what we've had to show you. But yeah, basically the news is that people like ISA the more they're using it. Would you guys agree that you're quite happy with what you're using ISA for? Is it robust? Is it stable? Generally, yes. Okay, it does what it says on the tin. All right, some extra resources that we have through the TechNet area. And of course, don't forget your evaluations to win your phone. Now, I'd like to open up the floor for any questions. We've been through a lot of stuff, okay, a lot of myths. Some of you may have little laser pointers aimed at me right now, or flashes in some cases, okay? Some new concepts maybe to some of you. Some of you, maybe you've heard this before. But if you've got any questions, please come to one of the microphones up at the front here. I'll also be doing a Chalk and Talk session in about half an hour's time. We were discussing remote access with Whale and ISA server and bits and pieces, so you're also welcome to come and ask questions there. But, any questions at the moment? Got to be something. Can't cause all this controversy.
I have one question, please.
Where's that coming from? There we go.
Yeah, I'm here, yeah. You told about the balancing in ISA server. So we have an, incoming balancing of incoming traffic. But what about outgoing balancing? It doesn't exist in ISA server 2006.
Sorry, outgoing what, sorry?
Outgoing balancing. Balancing of outgoing traffic.
Oh, balancing the outgoing traffic.
Yeah.
Yep, you can do that with ISA server. You can use network load balancing on the internal interface and load balance the outgoing traffic. And you can use a combination of network load balancing for secure NAT clients and also using CARP with the routing script for web proxy traffic as well. So you can use a combination of the two on the way out. Now, it's useful to combine CARP with NLB because the routing script that you configure in your web browser, that should point to an NLB-based URL. So don't point it at server number 1 to get the script, because if that server's down, you can't get the script. Okay.
Some companies have 2 internet providers, and they want to balance traffic between those providers. So this is a common situation.
Yep. The question's around how basically to get ISA server to support multiple external network connections. Okay, it's not something ISA server will do out of the box because Windows only has 1 default gateway on the box. All right, so this is part of the problem we have there. There are various things you can do depending on exactly what kind of problem you're trying to solve. You could have an array of 2 servers. Each server uses a separate ISP line. That's a way of balancing things. Okay, another way which probably works a bit better is to use some other small hardware device that is purely done as a load balancing switch. And you do it at layer 4, so it understands the 2 gateways to the internet, and ISA server uses it as 1 default gateway. Because those little switches and things as well can also give you DNS failover for incoming connections. So connections can come through ISP line 1, when things are operational. If that line goes down, the box can re-register your DNS record and bring it up on the other line. Okay, and on ISO, the rule is the same as far as it's concerned. So there's various different bits you can do. There once was a nice little application called Rainfinity, from Rainwall and Rain Connect. Anyone familiar with that? No. Unfortunately, you can't buy it anymore, which is a shame. That was a great little application. You could just install software on ISO to do the job. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Any other questions?
Will there be antivirus solution in the next ISO server version?
Yeah.
Forefront for ISO.
Forefront for ISO server. That one I cannot tell you. I don't know. It would be nice. I agree. That may be on the cards. We'll have to find out from one of the Microsoft guys. Come along to the Q&A session in about half an hour's time. Hopefully we can answer that one for you. All right. But there are plenty of other third-party ones you can plug in right now that will do it.
I know, yes.
Okay. Anything else?
Can you use NAP for quarantine the VPN clients?
NAP, yeah, I mean, the ISO server as is right now, it doesn't necessarily link in with NAP in that way. Obviously, going forwards, then things will change as NAP gets integrated within the products. So yeah, that will be a way going forward. How long that will take before it's available is another question. We can ask one from Microsoft who can maybe tell you. But the VPN quarantine that you see in ISO server is here today, and you can use it right now.
Excuse me? You have mentioned that there are zero vulnerabilities discovered in ISO.
Yep.
But what about vulnerabilities in the operating system?
Yep, good question. Windows has vulnerabilities, right? The beauty is you install ISO server in a Windows box. It's the most locked down Windows box you're going to get. It cannot do anything. It can't receive packets from anywhere, and it can only send packets from itself to small things on the internal network like domain controllers. Okay, you've locked that machine down as much as possible. So does a risk or a vulnerability that exists in Media Player pose a real-world threat to your ISO server? Probably not. If you're watching videos in Media Player on your firewall, you've got a bigger problem than worrying about patching it. Okay, so yes, you're right. There will be vulnerabilities in the operating system. Okay, nothing that will affect the ISO server's functionality. All right, because the ISO firewall is not just a bit of software that runs the service on the box. If you open up Device Manager, and I urge you guys to do this, go into Device Manager, go to View Extra Hardware, and it shows you all that hidden stuff. You'll notice there's an ISO driver in there. Okay, it installs a low-level network driver, and if that driver loses communications with the ISO server service, it puts it in a lockdown mode. So killing and stopping the ISO service doesn't open up the box like some people think it will, because there's a low-level driver that's always running. So if you want to turn off ISO, you've got to disable those drivers as well, or uninstall it. So that's a kind of deep integration the operating system ISO has, and that's why the box itself will be protected from vulnerabilities within the OS to varying degrees. Obviously, if there was a vulnerability within a portion of the operating system that ISO is using, then that may affect things. But the fact ISO is on the box would also limit the exposure of any vulnerability.
There are ISO on Nokia appliances.
Sorry, ISO?
On Nokia appliances.
ISO on Nokia.
Is it different than ISO on a regular server, or how is it that comparable?
Sorry, I didn't quite understand the question. So ISO server on Nokia appliances?
Yes.
Yeah.
How is that different than just ISO on regular hardware?
Well, I mean, ISO needs to run on a Windows platform. So if you can get Windows running on a Nokia box, then sure, go for it. All right. You can get hardware appliances already for ISO server. They've been around for quite a while. So if your preference is to buy a shiny piece of blue tin with different color flashing lights and you want ISO server on it, you can do that. There are various vendors right now out there that will give you that. So some of them are Celestix, Network Engines, there's OSST, there's various other ones out there. So take a look on Microsoft.com/ISO server, and there's all the hardware vendors there. And those devices are really nice because you can just rack them up, and in 10 minutes, your firewall is up and running. You don't have to mess around installing Windows, running a security configuration wizard, installing ISO, and all the other bits and pieces. And because it's pre-built hardware custom to the job, they often have like 6 gigabit Ethernet ports across the front. So they're kind of hardware built for the job. Not that they're more secure, because again, you create that dumb rule number 37 test, allow all traffic everywhere at all times to get something working. It doesn't matter if you're on this piece of software or on an appliance, you've just blown a hole through the whole thing. And that doesn't matter whether it's ISO or Checkpoint or whatever other product you're using. Okay, so one's not intrinsically more secure than the other, but some of the appliances can do value adds that you don't necessarily get just with the software install. For example, Celestix will install third-party add-ons as part of the base appliance image. So you can do image-based backups of the hard drive. They've added quality of service type bandwidth management onto the box out of as standard. So there's various other benefits you can get with an appliance. Okay, any other questions?
What about throughput?
Throughput. How quick's your internet line?
13 megs.
Okay. You got a dual-core Xeon-style processor to process 13 megabit per second. It can do that with its eyes closed, even if it's authenticating and decrypting and encrypting traffic. Okay, there's a lot of also mysterious concepts around performance of ISA server, or any application layer device. Okay, let's make this clear. Application inspection does slow things down. It has a lot more work to do. We're analyzing the data portion of a packet, not just the header. Okay? But is that going to be slower than the physical network layer underneath it? That's what you've got to think about. Also think about the fact of, well, what's the point of running security scanners at the airport with the belt on full speed if the scanner is turned off? Who cares how quickly you can take something and do nothing with it, or very little with it? If you're putting the device in place to add security, then do security. And if you need the security to be quicker, then put a second device in, or put a bigger device in. But don't not do the security because it needs to be quicker and less secure. It doesn't make sense. Okay, but you look at some of the higher end appliances or build your own server, okay, you can put a lot more processor power in there than your internet provider can affordably give you. Okay. Any more questions?
Yeah, I have one.
Sure.
I had a discussion with a checkpoint consultant and how to secure Outlook web access.
Mm-hmm.
And
That must have been interesting.
Very.
That must have been interesting.
He said the discussion about level 7 security.
Mm-hmm.
And my point was that ISA is very secure and is checking that it's HTML that goes through. And he says, yeah, maybe because we don't know what it's doing. We have no white papers on that. In Checkpoint, we can make a set of rules so we know what we are checking.
Okay. One question to ask yourself when you're doing Outlook Web Access. What protocol were you using from the internet?
SSL.
SSL. Can you install an SSL certificate on your Checkpoint box?
He said so, yes.
Okay, if you can, then you can decrypt the traffic and do something with it. The vast majority of devices out there either don't have the add-on modules installed to do it, or don't have the capability of installing an SSL certificate on it. ISA server can, even 2000 can. All right, so things like OWA, you can only do the inspection of the traffic in the HTTP if you can decrypt it. Most firewalls cannot do this. Okay, most of them require a separate off-box or extra update or add-on to it to allow it to do web proxy style connections. If it can do that, great. Okay, make use of it if it will do what you want it to do, as long as something is doing it. Don't just allow port 443 through the device encrypted and think it's great because the Visio looks pretty. Okay, as long as if you've got a checkpoint box that can do it, great, use that. Okay, but is it doing everything else that you can do with ISA server? Is it authenticating? Is it offloading the forms authentication? Is it doing deep HTTP inspection? Is it making sure the URLs conform to what OWA-style URLs should be? Okay, that's the type of level you should be looking at. If you can do all of that, then you know what? If you can afford it, then do it. But as long as you're doing it with something.
Yeah, I'm not sure they could do that, but we were talking about just a HTML authentication because the ISA server box checks that it is HTML by decrypting the SSL. In Checkpoint, you'll have to make the rules yourself. But in ISA server, do we have any white papers on what it do, what it will allow and not allow?
Yep, there's plenty of them. Have a look on the TechNet website in the ISA server section. There's a lot of white papers out there, especially if you're looking for something in front of Exchange. Between the ISA and the Exchange group, there's a lot of white papers on how to do this kind of thing. ISA has also got built-in wizards for you for particularly deploying Exchange. All right, so the wizards will just ask you a lot of dumb questions like which version of Exchange are you using, what's the server name, and this kind of stuff, and you put a certificate in, and it just sets up all the rules for you. So it's very simple to do. But the process it would go through for Exchange would be ISA would take the SSL connection in. Okay, that would be decrypted using the SSL certificate on the ISA server. Because it's now decrypted, it can inspect it, make sure it is HTTP, and you're not just shoving some rubbish down port 443. It can then authenticate the traffic because it now has access to the credentials now they're decrypted. Right? It can verify those credentials with the Active Directory or some other radius method. It can then re-encrypt in a second SSL session back to the Exchange server. Or you may wish that to stay in the clear, or you may wish to use something like IPsec and just encrypt port 80. It's now on your network. You can make choices. Okay, but typically most firewalls, unless they have web proxy capabilities, cannot do this. Web proxy is a layer 7 concept. It takes the understanding of the HTTP protocol to do it. Most firewalls are still only layer 4 because they're really, really quick at doing hardly anything. Okay, and they'll just route port 443 through them. So make sure the technology you're using is doing what you think it's doing. Okay.
Thanks.
Pleasure. Anything else?
Yeah, the
One
same
more.
subject. We have the following scenario. We have the users that try to access an SSL server in the internet. So the ISA decrypts the traffic from the user and then encrypts it back. How can the user check if the certificate from the server is okay?
Okay.
Because the user sees the ISA certificate.
Yeah, well, in that scenario, just using a publishing scenario, so the user on the internet is accessing your internal server.
No.
You're doing it the other way around.
Yeah, the other way around.
All right, so outbound SSL inspection. That is a bit more tricky.
Yep.
Okay, outbound SSL inspection, ISA server out of the box cannot do that because you're not using your own certificate. Your browser on the internal network is connecting to a server on the internet using someone else's certificate. And you obviously can't get a copy of that private key to decrypt that. All right, so there's a problem there with outbound proxying, which most proxy servers suffer with. However, there are third-party plugins, yet again, you can add in to ISA server to make it decrypt outgoing traffic. Okay, it just installs a private certificate which you created in your environment and presents that to the browser. So your internal user won't actually see the internet certificate. It will just see that, okay, that's a certificate that my company has issued me, therefore I should trust
but
it.
that's a big issue because the user cannot detect if it's a phishing website, for example.
Well, the user could still check the certificate and see that it's issued by your company and not by somebody else.
Yeah, but the ISA cannot check if the certificate of the remote web server is okay.
Yeah, ISA would still do that. ISA can still check the validity of external certificates.
And if it corresponds to the name of the website.
Then, yeah, if the certificate isn't valid, the user doesn't get there.
But the user does not have the ability to choose to continue the connection or not.
Okay, we take that one offline. We can go through a bit more detail.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Conscious of time, we're running out here. There was one more last question here, I think, somewhere. Yeah, the good old chestnut one. Why can't you choose the outbound IP address from ISA server, like a static one-to-one netting scenario? Okay, this is something you cannot do with ISA server. It's more of a restriction in Windows because when Windows sends traffic from a box, it always leaves the primary IP address, no matter what product you've got running on Windows. Okay, it's just the way Windows works. This has been raised many, many times, and from my understanding, there is no plan on fixing that, but I stand corrected. And the argument always is this a security problem? Generally, no. It does not make anything more or less secure by saying it came from a different IP. Okay, because if it's coming from that same interface, it would probably have to be on the same subnet anyway to be able to route where it's going. So you're not actually adding in security value. All you're doing is creating more complexity, which might make it easier to put ISA in your already complex environment, yes. But is it necessarily a good thing to be doing? Okay, there's no security value behind it, which is why there is never a business case good enough to do this change, because it would be a huge change to do. Okay, so you have to be aware, that's one thing you can't do. All right, we'll have to leave it at that. Any more questions, please come to the session at 5:30, and we can carry on some questions from there. Thank you very much for coming.